Susan Rice. I know. Okay, everyone, we have a lot to get to with Susan. First, London and Sudan. A lot going on today. Tell us why we care.
Well, first of all, if you're in my business, it's a rare day when you wake up and there are two good news stories right off the bat. So Assange leaving or being removed from the embassy and hopefully coming to face justice in the United States is really good for the United States and really good for the world. So that's point one. Chalk it up for a good day. And then secondly, in Sudan, which you've been talking about, to see Omar Bashir, who for 30 years has tormented the people of Sudan from Darfur to Khartoum, removed from power is also a good thing. Now the concern is the military's taken over, and a coup to replace a coup is not inherently a good thing. So there needs to be a genuine and swift transition. And the promise that the people of Sudan have waited so long for to actually have the opportunity to determine their own destiny. So the jury is definitely out, but today's a better day than yesterday in Sudan as well. Now, would that we could say the same thing here in the United States?
We're going to get to that. So most of you, all of you now know that Susan and I spent a lot of time together in the White House. One of my favorite things to do is travel the world with her. And when we would travel the world together, oftentimes the National Security Advisor and the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, well, we were considered the continuity of government. So if anything terrible happened while we were in a foreign country with Barack Obama, Susan and I were in charge. And you could rest assured that everything would be handled properly. Susan, do you think this administration knows exactly what they're doing?
Not so sure. Not so sure. You know, imagine you're in an overseas venue, you're in a motorcade, as Alyssa and I were, and the people in that vehicle that she called control, as it's known, really do have an enormous amount of responsibility, along with the military aides to the president and Secret Service, et cetera. And even if you assume in this administration that the people who are riding in that same vehicle as we did had a sense of how to behave and proper protocols. At the end of the day, we were blessed to know that the commander-in-chief had his head on straight and was going to make calm, rational, thoughtful judgments in a crisis. And I think the concern is, the real question is what would be happening up in the vehicle known as the Beast, which is the president's car in any motorcade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, just worth noting that when Susan and I were the two people in control, we were probably the first time two women were ever in charge of the continuity of the government, so score one for Barack Obama for making that happen. Susan, what keeps you up at night? Let's start that up.
Running clock
I
here.
know. Don't worry, I've got my eye on the clock. We'll get to everything.
Well, there are subjects and issues that keep me up at night, but quite honestly, I worry also a lot about the quality of decision making. Mm-hmm. And you know, there are reasons why in the national security world we have processes. We have a National Security Council. We have a principals committee and a deputies committee that spend hours carefully considering all angles of the most difficult issues and making thoughtful, informed recommendations to the president, who is meant to carefully study the options, analyze the information, and come to a thoughtful, rational decision. And what is so broken is not just at the very top, which is self-evidently broken, but the process is broken. There are very few principals committees meetings anymore. That's the meeting that I used to chair as National Security Advisor with my cabinet level counterparts on everything from North Korea to Iran to Ebola, you name it.
Everything.
And you know, we would have 2 to 3 such meetings a week, and that was following a great deal of preparatory work done at the deputies level, one below, and at the working level throughout government. And now it's quite obvious that decisions are made not only by tweet on the fly, but that beneath that, there has not been a process to consider the ramifications of critical decisions. And so you have things like the president saying one thing one day on North Korea and the Treasury Department saying another thing and the president contradicting him the subsequent day. And that in a case where we're dealing with an adversary that ought to be taken quite seriously. And so that's indicative of the process being broken. And so I worry a lot that when you think about it, there have been very few exogenous crises that have hit this administration, thankfully.
I just knocked wood for us.
Yeah, knock wood for all of us, because by this time, and certainly in the Obama administration, and I think in most previous administrations, as luck would have it, something or many things had happened that were curveballs coming at us from left field. Most of the challenges this administration has faced has frankly been challenges of their own creation. Yep. But when and if, as is inevitable, a major crisis hits, I worry a great deal that the systems aren't in place, the processes aren't in place, the muscle memory's not in place for the kind of thoughtful decision making that we need.
And one of the things that I have noticed and that I've talked about, the way that you can tell how broken the process is the number of leaks that come out of the administration. Because one of the things that Susan and I can tell you, we did not have many leaks because of the very processes and the deputies committee and principals committee that you hear her talk about, because everybody had thoughtful consideration. If they didn't get their way, they had been heard. And now that is not what's happening. Another sort of issue that is out there that I don't know if everyone understands entirely how impactful it is, the lack of confirmed cabinet secretaries and appointees, specifically in the Department of Homeland Security. Why is that bad?
Because we need a secure homeland, and it doesn't. The Department of Homeland Security is one of the largest, most sprawling, complex bureaucracies in the U.S. government. And you all know it deals with everything from cybersecurity to terrorism to the border. And to have so many key positions vacant or with actings is quite disconcerting. And then recall that we also have an acting Secretary of Defense for now over 100 days. We have no UN ambassador.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go down the list of half the cabinet, it seems, is vacant, or with acting individuals who don't have the security and the stature, security of position or the stature to be as effective as we need them to be. So this is, I don't know if it's part of the deconstruction of the administrative state, right, or what this is, but whether you're looking at the State Department, where there are many vacancies and no nominees, or our ambassadorial ranks, there seems to be a deliberate disinterest in having human beings run the government.
It's a bummer. Don't get me started. Susan knows how I feel about that. When you see the breakdown of process, are there crises in the past 2 years that you feel the U.S. was late to the game on because of the chaos in the internal NSC process?
Yes, and I'll give you a couple of examples, but more than late to the game, there are just a whole range of issues that it seems that the government is not even engaged on.
Right.
I mean, if you think about it, what is this administration focused on in foreign policy? North Korea, good. Not good outcome, but good that they're paying attention. Iran, to which I think is getting outsized attention. And China, I guess, to the extent that we're engaged in a trade war with a dubious outcome. But we're not engaged on a constructive and regular basis with our European partners. We're not engaged in the outcomes in the rest of the Middle East, not to mention Africa, Latin America, with the exception of Venezuela, Southeast Asia. There's whole swaths of the world that seem to be not worthy of the time and attention of senior American officials, which is not, frankly, a luxury the United States has when you at least aim to be the global leader. And so, there are a whole lot of things that aren't getting attention. But, interestingly, in recent weeks, I've been struck by the floods in Mozambique and the cholera outbreak in Mozambique. I don't know, Mozambique, by the way, Zimbabwe and Malawi. I don't know if that's on many people's radar screens, but thousands of people were lost in floods that were foreseen and actually replicated a situation that happened in the year 2000, back when I was in the Clinton administration working on Africa. In 2000, the United States military deployed to southern Africa and had helicopters picking victims off of the roofs of huts and out of trees in southern Africa. And that happened because the deputies and the principals got together, sat around the table in the Situation Room, and decided that this was a priority. We were able to move quickly, we were able to save lives. Obviously, that level of military engagement was not replicated this time. Although to the credit of the administration and to Africa Command, they did ferry in supplies and the like. Another example is the Ebola epidemic. Many of you may not even know that the world's second worst Ebola outbreak is now raging in eastern Congo, and in an even more difficult context than the one we faced in 2014. And yet, back in 2014, it was the United States, under President Obama's leadership, that rallied the world to contain that epidemic and limit the loss of life. And all of these issues seem to be falling off the table or don't even hit the table in this administration. And it's part of the reason why the world is looking at the United States and wondering where we've gone.
Susan, we have, you specifically, colleagues from your days in the NSC, John Brennan, who was in the White House, became CIA director, Jim Clapper, director of national intelligence. These are apolitical people who have historically held apolitical positions, who now in this administration have felt compelled to speak out about what they're seeing and why it's wrong. Do you think that do you think that that's right? And do you think that the intelligence community pays a price for them having to speak out in this way?
Well, I know John Brennan and Jim Clapper extremely well. We spent more hours than I can count working on some of the most difficult issues together, and I count them both as friends. But above all, I count them as extraordinary patriots and professionals who've given their careers to serving this country, apolitically and with extreme dedication. And the fact that they have been attacked and vilified, like many of us, for our service in prior administrations, I think is a damn shame, and it doesn't at all do them the service and the justice that they deserve. They're speaking out because they are patriots and professionals, and because they are profoundly uncomfortable with the direction that we're heading and the vilification of the intelligence community and law enforcement. And they're right to speak out. And, you know, if anything is doing damage to our intelligence community and to our law enforcement, it's having a commander-in-chief that denigrates them on a daily basis.
Susan, do you think that that the United States still holds the position in the world that it held, let's say, like 10 years ago?
No.
Okay, that was easy.
No.
What global leaders do you think have risen to the challenge, the occasion, as our foreign policy has become inconsistent?
Well, I think, first of all, you know, if you look around the world, there are many places where the internal dynamics in countries that were once reliable and steady have shifted. And so, obviously, we're not the only place where things are a little inconsistent or funky. Yes, that's a good word for it. But I think in this context, Angela Merkel of Germany has emerged as a steady, reliable, thoughtful, responsible leader. And some have dubbed her the leader of the free world, and I don't think that's a misplaced characterization at the moment. But our standing in the world has suffered not only relative to 10 years ago, but relative to 2 years ago.
I was being generous.
I know you were, but I want to make that distinction because the world has long looked to the United States to lead with respect to our values, to lead with respect to our interests, to bring coalitions together, whether it's to fight ISIS or to put pressure on Russia after its invasion of Ukraine or to deal with the Ebola epidemic. We lead, we bring countries together, and we speak in defense of human rights, in defense of freedom of the press and our core values. And all of that has changed. Mm-hmm. Not only are we not leading, not only have we jettisoned our values, but we are actually modeling the opposite behavior. And instead of therefore being a steady, reliable, predictable leader on the world stage, we are actually now an exporter of instability.
Right.
And that's a horrible thing to have to say. And I think it's not only caused us to lose our standing and our influence, which redounds to the detriment of our security, but we should not assume that it will be quick or easy to regain what's been lost.
That's what I was going to ask.
It's going to be really hard. And I think it'll be a while, even with the best effort and the best leadership, before the world can take a deep breath and have some degree of confidence that we're not going to pull this trick on them again.
Yeah. Whew. Since I think all of us know the news is entirely dominated by 2020 and Trump's tweets and things that the administration wants us to pay attention to, which are literally the opposite of what we should be paying attention to. So what are a few things that are happening in the world that you think people don't have their eyes trained on, that we need to be careful of and need to be paying attention to?
It's a long list, but let me just give you a couple of examples. You will recall that it wasn't many weeks ago that India and Pakistan were on the verge of a hot war. Two nuclear-armed powers that the United States and the world have long been extremely worried about and have long sought to diffuse tension between when that tension arises. Some of you are going to be old enough to remember back in the Clinton years where things heated up very much, and the President of the United States was on the phone, engaged with the leadership of both countries very actively, trying to diffuse a potential crisis. Did we see anything approaching that? Not even the President or the Secretary of State, much less others at a lower level, trying to prevent the prospect of what could be one of the most catastrophic developments that any of us can imagine. Now, thankfully, the leaders in both countries were able to diffuse the situation. But it isn't always thus, and there are many places around the world where the degree of attention that the United States would normally devote to a situation is lacking. Mm-hmm. Let me give you another place where it's not that our attention is lacking, but I think when I say our attention, the United States government's attention, but I think perhaps public attention is lacking, and that's Afghanistan, mm-hmm. where after 17 years of U.S. and NATO involvement, Americans have gotten tired and moved on, but we still have nearly 15,000 American servicemen and women on the ground in very difficult and dangerous situations. There is an effort on the part of the administration to try to engage in a dialogue with the Taliban and bring the Afghan government together with the Taliban. And that's the right kind of diplomacy that we should be doing more of elsewhere, even if it hasn't yet yielded concrete results. But the American people, I think, have gone to sleep mm-hmm. On certain issues that we can't afford to. And when we're constantly being bombarded by the insanity of the day, blowing up our phones, literally, it's very hard to look beyond our immediate borders and beyond the most hot crises around the world and pay attention to the things that matter in far-flung parts of the world and here inside our own country. 3 black churches mm-hmm. burned in Louisiana, it's barely a beat. That's an example.
Do you ever get a little hot when you think about the standards that we were held to? And did Barack Obama have to give you your security clearance, or did you do your clearance the old-fashioned way? And why, just quickly, why for everyone is it so bad to circumvent the historical process of security clearance? You have no idea what they did to us.
3 times a week at least I wake up and say, can you imagine if we had done this?
Can you imagine?
Can you imagine? Anyway, there's no point in dwelling on that. The security clearance thing is mind-boggling. There is a reason that everybody in the White House, from those that literally take out the trash and take the classified material and put it in from the burn bag into the incinerator, up to the President of the United States, need to have a security clearance. They are in contact with, overhearing conversations about dealing with documents that relate to the most sensitive information we have. And the notion that the traditional, responsible, professional process for deciding if a person merits a security clearance has been, in over 25 cases, as reported, completely been blown off. Not just for the president's son-in-law, but for low-level people. Why? And the costs of that are extraordinary. And again, you know, had we...
I can't.
Can you imagine?
No, I get really upset thinking about it because I personally had a lot of issues with my clearance because I smoked a little weed. That now, and I was so ashamed. I was on like probation. I had to get drug tested for a year. And now I see Jared Kushner, who's on WhatsApp with Mohammed bin Salah, and I'm just like, cool, that's awesome. Seriously. Yeah, we really held ourselves to a standard. Okay, so this is our last question for Susan. Some of you, I'm sure, if you're on Twitter or just read a paper, have seen a sort of call from the people for Susan to run for the United States Senate in Maine. And so, I mean, I have been waiting to make my plans until Susan makes up her mind about what she's going to do in 2020. And so she has made up her mind. And Susan, what are you going to do?
I've made up my mind. Well, thanks, Alyssa.
I mean, I wasn't...
Jeez. I think like a lot of people, I was deeply disappointed when Susan Collins decided to vote for Brett Kavanaugh.
You mean when she said that he said Roe v. Wade was settled law?
Right.
You mean then?
Then.
Cool.
It felt like a betrayal, frankly, to all women. And it made me think very seriously about whether I ought to run for Senate in 2020. And I did. And I've done some homework, and I've spent a lot of time thinking and talking about it with my family. You know, I love Maine. My family has deep roots in Maine that go back more than 100 years. And we've owned a home there for many years. And I really believe that the state of Maine deserves the best possible leadership in the Senate. But I've given this a lot of thought, and in the course of weighing it all, I've decided with my family that the timing really isn't right for us. Sorry.
I know.
No, but I have, you know, I got to explain. Oh, listen up. I've got a daughter going into her junior year in high school in Washington. And this is not the time to move ourselves full-time up to Maine and to put my family through the stresses of a campaign. I don't rule out running for office in the future.
Okay, good.
I don't rule that out at all, in Maine or beyond. But after all my family has done to support me, as much as they have sacrificed over many years to enable me to serve as I have, I've got to put them first.
Hear you. I love you for that. But we are going to go places in 2020,
we're going
though.
places. Look,
I
first of
mean,
all,
you can't stop us.
we're going to support the Democratic nominee in the
Yes,
state
we
of
are,
Maine.
no matter who it is.
And then we're going to bust our behinds to help the right people win in 2020.
Right.
Across the board. You and I are going to...
We're going to do it, and then when Susan decides to run for president someday, I will be her campaign manager. You heard it here first.
Amen!
That's it. We're done. Thank you.